Have you ever sat in a quiet room and wondered, do they even care? You gave your life to your children. Years of sacrifice, love, and unconditional support. But now, the silence between you feels louder than anything else. You send a message, no reply. You leave the door open, they don't walk through it. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question begins to take shape. Are they waiting for me to fall apart? If that question hits a nerve, you're not alone. Many older parents quietly suffer from emotional distance with their adult children. Not because they've done anything wrong, not because they're weak, but because somewhere along the line, the love that once felt so mutual began to feel like a one-way street. And here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. Some kids are not waiting for you to heal. They're waiting for you to break. It's a test, but not the kind you can pass by loving harder. It's a test of emotional strength. A quiet psychological power struggle where the first one to reach out, to apologize, to chase, loses ground. And if that person is always you, it might be time to change the game. Today, we're going to talk about what that shift looks like. Not just emotionally, but practically. Because this isn't about cutting people off. It's about reclaiming your peace, rebuilding your worth, and learning how not to crumble when the people you love the most go silent. So let's begin with a hard truth. Sometimes the ones we raised wait to see if we'll crumble, because it gives them control. They know your patterns. They know that when things go wrong, you're the one who will call first. You're the one who will explain, soothe, make excuses, and absorb the blame. And they've learned something from that. They don't have to meet you halfway. They just have to wait. The longer you wait to hear from them, the more uncomfortable you get. The more questions swirl in your head. Did I say something wrong? Did I push too hard? Should I apologize again, just in case? And when you finally can't take the silence anymore and you reach out, they win. Not because they're bad people, not even because they're doing it intentionally, but because in their world, whoever breaks the silence first loses the power. And this pattern, if left unaddressed, can leave you feeling anxious, invisible, and emotionally exhausted. You start doubting yourself. You replay conversations. You feel like you're always walking on eggshells just to keep some form of connection alive. But what if the answer isn't to keep trying harder? What if the real strength lies in not reacting at all? Because here's something powerful. You are not broken just because they stopped calling. Your value as a parent does not disappear just because your child is distant. And the moment you stop measuring your worth by their behavior, that's when the healing begins. This brings us to something many parents don't realize until it's too late. The illusion of closure. Maybe you've thought to yourself, if I could just have one honest conversation, maybe then I'd get the answers I need. If they could just tell me why they're pulling away, I could fix it. If we could just talk like we used to, maybe we could start over. But here's what that hope is really built on. The belief that closure comes from the other person. It doesn't. Let me say that again, because it matters more than anything else in this moment. Closure does not come from them. It comes from you. You may never hear the full truth. You may never get the apology you deserve. You may never have that one last talk that wraps everything up in a neat little bow. And chasing it? It will only leave you more confused, more tired, more heartbroken. See, the people who leave rarely give closure, because in their mind, it's already over. By the time they stop answering your calls, they've already made the decision. They've already emotionally moved on. Meanwhile, you're stuck in the middle of the storm, trying to make sense of it all. But you can't fix a relationship if you're the only one still in the room. So what can you do? You accept the silence. You stop fighting it. You stop explaining yourself to people who've stopped listening. And you start focusing on someone who needs you now more than ever. You. I know that might sound too simple, maybe even a little cold. But let's think about this together. What happens when you keep chasing that phone call, that message, that moment of clarity that never arrives? You put your life on hold. You stop doing the things that bring you peace. You let your emotional well-being hinge on someone else's decisions. And that's not love. That's self-abandonment. So instead, what if you decided, right now, that your healing doesn't depend on them? What if you chose peace, even without an apology? What if you said, I owe myself the closure they're not willing to give me? Because once you do that, something shifts. You begin the reconstruction phase, the part where you take all the hurt, all the confusion, all the weight you've been carrying, and use it to rebuild yourself stronger than ever. This is not about pretending you don't care. It's not about becoming cold or bitter. It's about stepping out of the emotional loop that's been draining you for too long. You get your energy back, you get your confidence back. You start living again, not as someone's parent, not as someone's emotional safety net, but as a whole person with your own dreams, boundaries, and peace. And here's where something unexpected happens. When you stop chasing, they start noticing. Not always right away. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, even years. But absence, when paired with dignity, is powerful. They'll feel the difference. They'll wonder why you stopped trying. They'll scroll through old messages and realize you're not coming after them this time. And that's when the power dynamic changes. Because suddenly, it's not about control anymore. It's about respect. You didn't beg, you didn't fold, you didn't crumble, you rose. And in doing that, you become someone they can't ignore. Not because you yelled or cried or chased, but because you stopped making them the center of your emotional life. You made yourself the center. And that's the greatest gift you could ever give. Not just to yourself, but to them. Because when they see you strong, calm, and at peace, they start to realize just how much they may have taken for granted. And by then, you'll be too grounded to fall apart again. You've spent so long worrying about how they feel, what they're thinking, and whether they'll come around. But what if, just for a moment, you turned all that energy inward? What if you stopped waiting and started rebuilding, not for them, but for you? That's the heart of what we'll talk about now. The reconstruction phase. Because once you've stopped chasing closure, and the silence is no longer something you fear, you begin to notice a shift. You wake up one day and realize you're still here. You've been standing through the storm, stronger than you thought. And now it's time to rebuild the version of yourself that maybe even you forgot was still in there. You are not a broken parent. You are not a failure just because someone else couldn't appreciate you. And you are not too old to start again. Not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually. In fact, this stage of life might be the most powerful one yet, because you're no longer trying to prove yourself to anyone. You've been through things. You've learned what lasts and what fades. You know what real love looks like and what manipulation feels like. And that wisdom is your foundation. So how do you start rebuilding? You begin with one small choice. Invest in you. Maybe it means returning to something you once loved but forgot. A walk every morning, a journal, a good book, a class you always wanted to try. Maybe it means saying yes to new friendships, or saying no to the people who only come around when they want something. You build routines that honor your peace. You speak to yourself kindly. You show up for your own well-being the way you once showed up for everyone else. And in doing that, you send a powerful message, not just to the people who distanced themselves from you, but to yourself. I matter. I am enough. I am still becoming. This kind of rebuilding isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't need to be announced. It's slow, gentle, deep. And it creates a version of you that is unshakable. Now here's where something unexpected begins to happen. And it's something many parents never see coming. The less you chase, the more curious they become. And it's not because you're playing games. It's not about revenge or trying to teach them a lesson. It's a natural shift that happens when someone who was once emotionally dependent on your attention realizes they no longer have access to your peace. This is what we call reverse psychology, but not in the tricky, manipulative way. This is about detachment. And the truth is, when you genuinely let go, not pretending, not secretly hoping, they feel it. People notice when you stop orbiting around them. They notice when you stop texting to check in. They notice when your tone changes from emotionally open to quietly firm. And they notice when you're no longer so available for the emotional games they once relied on. You see, neediness repels, but confidence, even quiet confidence, draws attention. When your adult child senses that you are no longer needing their validation to feel okay, it unsettles them. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because they were used to being the center of your emotional gravity. And when they're no longer sure they have that role, they start to wonder, why hasn't mom called lately? Is dad really moving on with his life? Was I wrong about how much they needed me? Did I misread everything? And just like that, the roles start to shift, not in a dramatic way, but subtly, gradually, meaningfully. But for that to happen, your detachment must be real. You can't pretend to let go while checking their social media every day, hoping for a message. You can't say, "I'm done," while secretly writing texts you never send. You can't physically stop reaching out while mentally holding your breath for their return. No, you must actually detach. You must get to the place where their presence or absence no longer controls the direction of your life. That's not cold, that's clarity. Because love built on guilt or control isn't love at all. It's obligation, it's emotional tug-of-war. And you deserve better than that. Now let's talk about the most underrated force in any relationship. Something so simple, so quiet, yet so powerful. Absence. Absence, when used with dignity and strength, is not punishment. It's a message. It says, "I will no longer stand in a place where I'm not valued." It says, "You may not notice my presence, but you will feel my absence." And they will. At first, they might act like it doesn't matter. They'll go on with their lives. They'll stay distant. They might even post pictures, make comments, or live as though nothing has changed. But over time, especially when your silence is calm, not angry, they'll feel it. The space where you used to be, it gets louder. That predictable phone call that always came, it doesn't. That supportive presence they took for granted, it's gone. And something strange happens. You start to live in their thoughts, even without saying a word. They may not admit it. They may not say it out loud, but they feel it. And in some quiet way, they begin to wrestle with it. Did I take them for granted? Were they stronger than I gave them credit for? Did I lose something that I can't replace? And all this happens not because you forced anything, but because you finally gave them the gift of your absence. That space becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, they see the impact of their choices more clearly than they ever did in your presence. Now, you might be wondering, what if they come back? What if one day, after all the silence, they reach out again? A message, a question, a "Hey, just thinking of you," maybe even an apology. And that, right there, is the real test. Not for them, for you. Because it's one thing to rebuild yourself when you're alone. It's another thing to stay strong when the very person who hurt you comes back and wants access to your life again. That moment is sacred, and you must treat it with care. Because what happens next will determine whether all the growth you've done becomes permanent, or whether you slide right back into the old pattern. But before we get into that final chapter, I want you to sit with this truth. Your absence is not weakness. Your silence is not surrender. Your detachment is not cruelty. It's courage. And courage, especially at this stage in life, is what changes everything. There's a certain kind of silence that settles when someone you love disappears from your life, and then one day, they come back. Maybe it starts small, a comment on an old photo, a text message out of nowhere, or a call after months, maybe even years. At first, you're not sure what to feel. There's a flicker of hope, maybe some confusion, and a swirl of old emotions you thought had finally settled. But before you respond, before you let them in, you have to ask yourself something very important. Are they reaching out because they've changed? Or because they've noticed that you have? You see, when you stopped chasing, when you stopped breaking down and started building yourself back up, they felt it. They may not have said anything, but they noticed. Your silence carried weight. Your absence created space. And that space gave them something to think about. But now, as they slowly return, you need to understand. This moment isn't about their message. It's about your response. Because here's the truth most people miss. When someone walks back in, it's rarely because they've had some grand realization. Often, it's because they want to know if the door is still open. Not necessarily because they're ready to honor it, not because they've healed or grown, but because they're curious, or lonely, or they simply miss the feeling of being needed. And if you're not careful, if you move too quickly, you risk losing everything you've just built. Most people, when this moment comes, fail the final test. They respond too fast. They get swept up in the excitement. They think, finally, they see my worth. But in doing so, they hand their power right back. You didn't grow through all that silence just to go back to begging. You didn't rebuild yourself just to be undone by one small breadcrumb. You didn't walk away just to turn around when they call your name. This doesn't mean you respond with anger. It doesn't mean you slam the door. It means you pause. You breathe. You remember who you've become. And then you respond, if you choose to, with calm, not desperation. With clarity, not confusion. With grounded peace, not emotional chaos. Because this isn't about getting even, it's about staying whole. You've made it this far by choosing dignity. Don't let a moment of weakness erase a journey of strength. And sometimes, the ultimate test is realizing you don't need to respond at all. Because the strongest move you can ever make in life, especially as a parent, is to walk away from emotional patterns that no longer serve you and to never look back. Not because you're bitter, not because you've stopped loving, but because you've finally started loving yourself enough to let go. You've given them time. You've given them grace. You've left the light on longer than you needed to. But now you choose peace. You close the door, not to shut them out forever, but to stop holding space for someone who chose not to stand beside you when you needed them most. And here's something you need to hear, especially if you're over 60. It is not too late to start fresh. You are not too old to set new boundaries. You are not too late to find joy in your own company. You are not stuck in the role someone else cast you in. You are still becoming. That version of you that they walked away from, that person no longer exists. You've outgrown them, and perhaps without even realizing it, you've outgrown the need for their approval too. And yes, it hurts to admit that someone you love might not come back in the way you hoped. But what's even more painful is living the rest of your life waiting for someone to fill a space they no longer want to stand in. That's why this moment, this choice, is the most powerful one you'll ever make. You walk away from chasing, you walk away from fixing, you walk away from begging, and most importantly, you walk away from needing them to validate your worth. Because the moment you stop asking, "Why did they stop loving me?" and start saying, "I never stopped being worthy of love," that's the moment your life changes. You reclaim your joy. You reclaim your identity. You reclaim your time, your heart, your future. And when they look back one day, and they will, they won't just remember the parent who tried endlessly to make things work. They'll remember the parent who rose anyway, who smiled anyway, who healed anyway. And by the time they realize what they lost, you'll be so far ahead that their absence won't sting the way it used to. Because you'll be full, not because they came back, but because you finally returned to yourself. That's the victory, not revenge, not making them feel bad, not waiting for the day they crawl back, but living so well, so freely, and so joyfully that you don't need that moment at all. So if you've ever felt invisible, ignored, or emotionally abandoned by your child, hear this. You are not forgotten. You are not a failure. You are not weak. You are someone who loved deeply, perhaps more than they ever understood. And now, You are someone who gets to love yourself the same way. So don't look back. Don't reopen the door you finally had the strength to close. Don't hand over your peace to someone who didn't protect it the first time. You have come too far. You have cried too many tears. You have stayed strong through too many silent nights to break now. This is your life, and it belongs to you, not your past, not their opinion, not their distance, just you. You get to write the next chapter. You get to decide what kind of parent, person, and soul you want to be moving forward. And trust me, there is so much still ahead for you. So many quiet joys, so many beautiful mornings, so many moments of peace that have nothing to do with who calls or who doesn't. So let this be your declaration. I walk away and never look back. Not because I gave up, but because I finally stood up for me. You deserve that, and you've earned it. If this message spoke to you today, I hope you'll take a second to share your story in the comments. You never know who might read it and feel a little less alone. And if you're ready to reclaim your joy, your peace, and your strength, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to Strong Elderly Life, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video that's just for you. Remember, you are not alone in this. You are loved, you are strong, and most importantly, you are still becoming. Here's to the next chapter. Let it be powerful, let it be peaceful, and let it be yours.